patterns we find at the Logos Institute for Crisis Management and Executive Leadership is that leaders who guide their organizations successfully through crises make smart choices at the right time. I've always been intrigued by the meaning of the word from which the English word crisis derives. The English word crisis comes from a very old Greek word that would have been pronounced something like krisis. And that word krisis comes to us from ancient Greek tragedy. In ancient Greek tragedy, krisis did not mean something bad that had happened. Rather, krisis referred to a moment in the plot of the tragedy where the protagonist needs to make a choice, and how that protagonist chooses determines his or her destiny for better or for worse. So, for example, the choice that one protagonist had to make was this: do I murder my father and marry my mother? He chose poorly. But 2,500 years later, we still remember the name of the guy who chose poorly. And we use his name as the name of a psychological syndrome for an inappropriate attachment to one's mother. I find the same applies in the world of crises today, that we only remember the crises that were poorly handled. So when my students or my clients ask me, what's the best handled crisis you've ever experienced? My response is to smile and to say, it's the one you never heard of. Because if you heard of it, it wasn't handled as well as it could have been. So let me ask you, imagine automobile recalls. You probably remember the General Motors Cobalt. You may remember the Toyota acceleration scandal. But I challenge you to think of 4 automotive recalls that were handled well. My prediction is you probably can't. I like to think of crisis as the moment of choice where a decision is called for. And in that moment of decision, how we choose determines the outcome. Now, we still have this idea of crisis meaning choice in other words in English. So, for example, criterion, the basis of choice, comes from an old Greek word, kriterion, which itself comes from krisis. And critic, the person who chooses that which is good and that which is bad, comes from krites, which is also from krisis. So in the DNA in English, we already have this notion of crisis as choice. So crisis management is the management of choices, the management of the process of choosing across an entire spectrum of kinds of choice, of what to do, of when to do it, of who should do it, of to whom we should do it. Effective crisis management is a rigorous process of managing choices.